Hello, my name is Ryan Lowther, and this is a presentation for ED6366 on June 24th, 2021. My project today is about cartoon diversity and taking a look at a cartoon for youth or children that might be considered to be more diverse versus one that doesn't perpetuate to be one or the other, more or less diverse, but to see how it actually lands up or matches up against. So our project itself, and the purpose of this project is, as I said, to look at two different animated television shows for youth. First, what we're going to do is take a look at each of the shows, a little bit about them, and then we'll get into the critiques of them. So the first show we're going to talk about is called Glitch Techs. Now, Glitch Techs is a show that has quite a range of different characters. It's what you would refer to as your standard kids action comedy show that has characters fighting monsters, things like that. Now, the process of choosing Glitch Techs itself came down to this desire to find a cartoon that is more diverse, or at least that society believes is more diverse. And I also want it to be a show specifically that is hosted on one of the bigger streaming services or TV channels, so that it wasn't some out of the way show. It's one that absolutely, is open to the greater public. In the end, Glitch Techs shows up on a lot of different lists when I did some searching on diverse cartoons, shows that provide diversity for children, things like that. It's not on every single list, but it is on a lot of them, and certainly, as this quote would demonstrate, it's one that people really feel within society that it is a diverse show. Of course, we're going to take a deeper look at that ourselves. Now, to offset that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Pokemon Sun and Moon. And of course, Pokemon is a franchise. It actually tops the list as the highest grossing media franchise in the world today. It was first launched in 1996. And what we're going to specifically look at is this show, Pokemon Sun and Moon. Now, how we chose the show, or how I chose this show, was actually to deal with the lived experiences of my two children. I have a 13 and a 16-year-old, both boys, and I asked them a couple of questions. I had them watch the first episode of Glitch Techs with me, and then asked them things like, what show would you have watched that this appeals to that same age group? And I was looking at the appropriateness. I already mentioned that, this is a show that battles monsters, and what would be a show that has a similar feel to it? And another thing was something that you would find equally entertaining, and they both really found Glitch Techs entertaining. And so it really came down to the watchability. And both of them, immediately when I asked these questions, both picked Pokemon immediately. And Pokemon Sun and Moon was one of their favorites. It was one that they had the video games for as well. It just goes to show the size of the franchise of Pokemon itself. So just to do a quick comparison between these two, Glitch Techs just came out in 2020. It only has 2 seasons. It was actually originally built for Nickelodeon and has now been released via Netflix instead. Pokemon itself, first year I mentioned that the franchise existed was 1996, but the first year for the television series was 1997, which means it now has 24 seasons. And this is considered to be 3 seasons, season 20, 21, and 22, the Sun and Moon series. Predominantly is provided through Disney and Netflix. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start off looking at critical feminist theories. We're actually going to do 2 theories. We're also going to do critical race theories. And we're going to break these down, and we're going to take a deeper look at each of these shows and do a little bit of a comparison between them and a review of what's inside them. So when it comes to critical feminist theory, we're going to look first off at what the driving and guiding questions are going to be for us, and then we'll look at the considerations. And what I've done is I've broken down the 2 shows between their characters, their plot, and a little bit of information about how they were produced as well. The questions we're going to use are the questions that were provided actually in class. These are really great guiding questions for us. So these come directly from our course material provided by TJ McLean. I'm not going to read through these questions, and as we address each of these questions or some of these questions within the critique, hopefully you'll be able to see that linkage as to how we were coming up with some of our critiques for the different shows. All right, so we're going to start off with characters. We're going to start off with glitch text, then we'll switch over to Pokemon. Then we'll look at some examples from each show about what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to make some references in there that we'll allude to as well. So, starting off, let's go to glitch text. Glitch text characterizations, how they build their characters. There's a few things that really stand out. The majority are binary categories. The non-human components, in other words, the monsters and so on, they, for the most part, are non-binary, non-gendered, with the exception of a few, usually those that are based more specifically on a character, for instance, Dracula or something to that effect. In terms of stereotyping within those categories, there's very little. There is some, but there is little. I've decided to break the show down into three components, or three locations of the show. So there's a home life component. You do see a little bit of stereotyping there, and I'll show an example of that, but it is certainly not super evident or super noticeable in terms of the different roles within the household. In one of the main characters' homes, Miko, you see both the father and the mother doing a mix of jobs, helping out. They both have different roles. There's no kind of standard stereotypical roles. In the workplace, while the manager is a male, we do in one episode see someone who is more superior to him, who is a female coming in. There's quite a balance there, and there's not necessarily that, well, you're a girl, therefore you should, or I'm a guy and therefore I should. There's nothing like that, so it's really quite balanced out. And then out in public, it's very much the same. Any businesses that you see, some are run by men, some are run by women, and there's quite a balance when you do see the two roles in at the same time. Which then leads to the possibility of what kind of power structure there is. And again, it's really quite balanced because the show is actually set up almost specifically to provide that balance. It provides equal opportunity across both genders throughout the show. It doesn't talk about gender. It almost begins from the point of neutrality when it starts. And again, that goes for the home. Both parents have different roles within different episodes. Same thing at work, and then the same thing in the public. One of the things I found the most interesting was when looking at the Bechdel test. And I was really impressed when I really started looking at this, how often there are two female characters, both named, who are having a very deep conversation about something to do or something that is important for the two of them or for one of them. And it has nothing to do with a male character within the show. So absolutely passes that test. In terms of the possibility of non-conforming characters, again, I mentioned the monsters and so on. There's not really a whole lot there in terms of this show. And in this situation of this show with glitch text, I would absolutely say that this would fall under female subjectivity. For the most part, these characters develop, these characters come about and develop based on their own experiences. And we're going to talk about that again a little bit later. So when we switch over to Pokemon characterization, again, there's clear binary categories in their show, but this time I would actually say that there is fairly extensive gender stereotyping within the show. Specifically, this show I've broken down into a family life situation, the Pokemon school, and then out in the public or in their adventures that they face. And certainly not every episode every time, but there's a lot of different cases, especially in the early episodes, where we can see absolute role differentiation between the two genders. So starting off with family, you have the main character Ash and his mother, and one of the things you're going to hear me talk a lot about here in the next few minutes is how often the female characters play a supportive, submissive role that is meant to support the male characters. And the family would be one of those situations. In the school, it would often see the same thing. Your initial professors that you meet are all male professors. The female students are all super duper happy. They just want to make you happy. They want to do whatever they can for you. They check on you. They comment on your well-being on a regular basis. The guys never do these things in the storyline. They're there more to do their job, that kind of idea. Out in public, you see the same thing. The female characters are quite often, again, not always, but quite often playing a role that is meant to support in the most loving way possible the other characters, where your male characters are doing what needs to be done. And we'll talk about that a little bit more again later when we talk about the plot. The patriarchal power system that exists here is kind of what I mentioned already. What we see is we see that even in the family, while there's no mentioned parent or male parent directly, there is a character that is modeled after a male that is given kudos for doing something for the family. And when the mom does something for the family, it's always done in a method of, I'm doing this for my son. And we're actually going to see a video of that a little bit later when we look at the examples. School, again, very similar idea. Even the stereotypical point that one of the female students just loves the nutrition concept of making good meals. And again, it's for everyone else. And then out in public, what we see is we see the males taking this dominant role. When something needs to be done, they're the ones that jump in and make it happen, not the females. As a result, we have a massive failure on the Bechdel test. Very rarely do we ever see two female characters talking, and if they do even talk, while they are named characters, we usually only see them talk about the amazing situation that the guy is in. There are non-conforming gendered characters, I would say, in Pokemon. What we see is a number of the Pokemon have natural traits that have made them look more male or female. I'll actually show a picture of one of those in a few moments, and it does go to the heart of what those characters are looking like. And in the article on gender and form of cereal box characters, Black noted that children might even identify more strongly with animal type characters, and gender disparities in these examples might be even more influential. So when we look at that example in a few minutes, you're going to see how concerning that could be. Finally, the female objectified use is massive here. I was shocked. I watched Glitch Tech first. My kids watched Pokemon for years, and I never, looked at it with a critical lens. And then I watched Glitch Techs with a critical lens, and I jumped over to Pokemon. And in a minute, you'll see the differentiation that I saw. So let's take a look at some examples. This is just from the first episode. Absolutely, we could go deeper, but this is what's brought up right off the bat in terms of the very first episode. What do we see from characters in terms of gender differentiation and gender categorization? So this is one of the very first scenes of Glitch Techs, and I did say it's not perfect. In this scene, you'll notice the father's fast asleep, the kids are making lots of noise playing video games, and mom is in the kitchen getting supper ready. As I said, not perfect by any means, but it is actually one of the more rare situations. When I first watched the first episode, I took all kinds of notes about things that I was like, maybe this should be a critique. But as I started watching, I realized how rare that actually was. So when we move on, this is a range of different female characters in the show, all in the first episode. What you have is up in the upper left corner is you have a gamer blogger talking about a big conference. In the middle top, you've got the grandmother driving. She's energetic, she's fun, she's powerful. Then you have Miko, the main character, playing guitar. I do want to point out her clothing. I'm going to point this out a few times that, you don't see a lot of skin. She just looks comfortable and happy. In the bottom left corner, you see Miko's mom. She's just talking to her. She doesn't look very happy there. That's not always the case, though. Then you've got, a girl working through the drive-through. And then finally, you have another one of the main action characters. And what I want to point out is when you look at all those images, I'd like you to notice that every different female character is drawn uniquely and differently. there's no concept of the other woman or the other female, and that there's one way to look and then there's another way to look. Each character is drawn very differently. And in Vagar Dubai's article on gender issues in children's literature, the concept about representing a lived narrative or a storyline of one's life is raised. And each character here seems to have had their own narrative. They have their own background. They have their own, way of being that is completely unique and different, and it's okay and supported to be that. So the final two pictures from that episode is Miko, the female main characters. There's two main characters, a male and a female. And here we have an image in her work outfit, I guess you could say, fighting monsters or glitches, and then in her everyday outfit. And there are some things I do want to point out. I did say the show's not perfect. One of the things you might notice is the extremely small waistline. That is there in the show with a few of the different characters. But what I also want to point out is, even in her everyday show, you'll notice she's wearing a crop top, but the amount of skin you see is still fairly minimal. Now, I'm just pointing that out because we're going to see something different when we go look at Pokemon. The only other thing that I do want to point out is the size of Miko's legs. And I only point this out because her character and her mother's character are two of the only characters who have legs that look like they have tone and definition, muscles to them. A lot of the other characters' legs are almost non-existent. And that's a commonality across kids' cartoons I've found. And I do find interesting that they've chosen for her character to do that separately. All right, let's hop over and take a look at Pokemon. So here's some examples of the female gender just again during the very first episode of the show. So here's 6 images, and they go almost in order of appearance in the show, and they caught my attention right off the bat. Like I said, I watched Glitch Text first. When you look at that top left picture, the things that stood out to me right off the bat were the girl in the bikini is a really tiny bikini, but looks like a very young age, and ridiculously long legs. And while I noticed that, it wasn't until the second picture in the top, the middle one, when the main character Ash brings back a Sea-Doo and is passing it back to the worker. I mean, her waistline is almost at his neck. And Ash is meant to be not a child, but a very responsible, middle-aged teen ready to do, battle kind of idea. And this girl doesn't look very old herself, yet look at the disproportionality. And what you're going to notice is in all 6 of these pictures, the leg length and the amount of leg and skin that you see is very noticeable. I pointed this out, as I was looking at this stuff to my wife. She came in and looked at my presentation. She's like, wow, you're right. That's a massive difference when you really start looking at it. In the picture in the bottom left corner, that's there not only for the legs, but also because in a market scene I thought was really interesting. It was only female characters that were at the market. There were no male characters. In the middle bottom, you're going to notice again the leg length, the amount of skin showing for the most part. You're also going to notice the poses from the girls are very submissive. You'll also notice the waist again is quite tiny through them and so on. And in that last photo in the bottom right, again, I mentioned the crop top from Miko in Glitch Text. Well, here's a crop top, but the choice, and this is a regular thing in the show, the choice is to show lots of skin, the high socks, the long legs, all those different things. Now, I mentioned that there is that concept of gender applied to a lot of the Pokemons, and that large picture on the left side is one of the first really important Pokemons in the show. It's in the first episode late in the show, and you're going to notice that this character has the tiny waist, the larger chest, the sounds that it makes are very feminine. And guess what? This character is being super helpful, super nice to our male main character. So that is something that starts showing even right off the bat in the first episode. The reason for the top right picture is because I've noticed in the first number of episodes a number of different times where the animators and the producers have focused on the lips or the mouth of female characters. You're going to see different segments that shot is given for no real reason. There's no real supporting story arc that would support that being there. So being maybe a little pessimistic, why is that there? So finally what I've done is the first episode is I think 22 minutes and 46 seconds. And I'm going to show you a minute and 5 seconds of video from the first episode of female characters who are doting over the male characters, for lack of better terms. Here we go.
Hey, Mom! I'm back! Hope you had fun, Ash. Sure did. We went diving with the Sharpedo. Saw lots of Pokemon I've never seen before. Yeah! That does sound like fun. We have Mimey to thank for winning the tickets for our Alola vacation.
Mr. Mime!
It's so hard to make a decision.
Show you around.
Really?
So sweet! Eager.
Come on!
That's what I like to hear. Thanks to you, Delia.
It's my greatest pleasure.
That's our Kiawe. You were great too, Ash.
Zoe's house is awesome. You know what? There's a training room in the basement. That's great. I love seeing you and Pikachu having a good time. And thanks, Mom. Huh? When I said I wanted to stay on the island, you said fine right off the bat. Of course I did. I am your mother. So I had a feeling you might ask me that. I was right.
So you can see from that video that there's just this constant tone of the show of what can I do for you? How can I help you? You're great. You're amazing. It's okay if you make a mistake. And this just continues in the whole first episode and the show over and over again. So just to close up, a couple references I made there. One was Black's concern about the possible greater influence of animal characters as seen on cereal boxes, but that concept that these fictional characters actually could have even more influence in the development of a child's gender schemas. So if you're watching Pokemon and all the characters that are female looking are super helpful, then that's just matching up that same storyline. It's just going on and on again. Where Glitch Tech, you don't really see that happening. The one character that is meant to be a helpful character is intentionally built to be very non-conforming, and it's this little robot helper kind of idea. There's a little robot helper in Pokemon as well, but it's a little cheeky, and it's got its own little attitude and so on, and you'd have to kind of decide how that fits in. And then of course Varga Du Bois' comments about the simplistic and essentialist representations of women. And when you look at the roles the women play in Glitch Techs, they all have important roles in society. They're business owners, they're partners, they're friends, they're helpers, they're enemies. They can be anything. There's no one role for that. Whereas in Pokemon, they absolutely play a supportive, submissive role. So now that we've looked at the character builds themselves, let's go take a little bit of a deeper look at the plot of each show in terms of feminism. So Glitch Tech's plot, there's very few obvious stereotypes. And I mentioned that before. There are some. That very first photo from home, we do see that. But as the show develops and you go into Miko's household and see her parents, that there is no real stereotype there. They're both fulfilling all the roles. Same thing at the workplace, same thing in public. And again, then that translates into a storyline that, has much more balance in terms of the power structure. There are certain people or characters who are trying to exert that, but it doesn't tend to have a real impact on the show or on the characters directly. Now I mentioned here that the female subjectivity is there, And the story seems to allow for that further development of the characters. So I think of one episode where Miko's little sister needs help, and it allows her sister to grow as a person and is challenged with her growth. It's not this simplistic storyline, right? So again, we're going back to that simplistic and essentialist representation. It's not that. It's much more complex than that. When we look at Pokemon's overall plot, we think about the fact that there are so many stereotypes that are obvious but not directly mentioned. So whether it's the mom within the family, or at school, the way the school is set up, the way the lessons run, the guy is always the one who volunteers to do the exciting stuff, and some of those things, like it's just built in there, and that's just continuously perpetuating who gets the opportunities and who gets the power for the power system within, more the school and the public. You don't see the home life in that sense a whole lot, but we see the guys getting more opportunities for battles and to get more challenges on the big championships and some of these things. And then at the end, I refer back to the video of the female objectified use. What is their purpose in the show, and how are they being used? It's not just a character issue. It's actually a part of the plot of the entire show itself. Now we're going to take a look for a second at the production of these two shows. There's not a lot here, but just a few points maybe worth noting. In the case of Glitch Techs, the actors or the characters are all done with assortment of voice actors, and usually those voice actors match up to both the sex and the race, just for our comments later, of the character on screen. Now this show is produced and created in the United States. Does that have an impact? Maybe. I tried to look a little bit into this and some of the histories. I found quite a variation. I thought it was really neat, the wide range of voice actors that are working on Glitch Tech. And the reason I point that out is when we go to Pokemon is created in Japan. So it's all voice dubbed for us in North America, and it's usually only done by a select number of actors. So as an example, one of the top actors, Sarah Natocini, I believe is how she pronounced it, is the voice for 26 different Pokemon characters and 10 of the human characters, including both Ash and Ash's mother. So what we see now is the show is being brought in, and all of a sudden, to make it popular, I guess, or to make it realistic production-wise and cost-wise, and I'm sure many different things, and we'll mention Marxism a little bit later in the presentation, there's this choice to do this. And someone like Sarah is amazing. You can watch videos of her work online. She's done hundreds, if not thousands, of characters across many cartoons, some of which are top shows. She's been doing the voice of Ash, I believe now for, I think it's nearly 10 years. So when you look at that, you could say, okay, kudos, great. We've got this woman and she's doing all this work, and that's great. But when it comes to the production, are we giving, equal ability and equal opportunities? Or are we saying, no, we want the best person for the job? What is the goal? And then what impact does that maybe play? Also, we've seen the level of stereotyping that exists inside the show. And if all these voices are being done predominantly by women, then, are we just part of a system that is perpetuating itself then? That becomes the next question. So those are the highlights in terms of some critiques to do with the critical feminist theories. So let's switch gears now and let's jump over to the critical racial theories and see what we come up with. Again, we're going to look at some driving questions. We're going to look at the character and the plot this time. We don't have anything extra really other than what I've already mentioned about the production. So the questions, again, the guiding questions used are the questions from our course provided by TJ McLean, for our ED6366 course. So let's take a quick look at the characters. So obviously we've already seen some of the differentiation between male and female characters. Now let's take a look at some of the different characters and how those characters play out in terms of race. So when it comes to Glitch Techs, the diversity within the characters in terms of race is massive, and that's one of the things the show was promoted for when I found it. There are a range of characters from a range of different races, and each character, the development of their race, it's not very, you know, simplistic and essentialist like we talked about earlier, even to do with race now instead of feminism. But each character, the way their voice sounds, the language they use, the way their characters act, they match up, right? So it's actually a race representation. It's not just a skin tone change. And then the diversity of the race also matches up with the diversity of the power. Every, you know, show starts from a basis that everyone has an equal opportunity, and that if you work hard, you're going to be able to do this. And it doesn't then show that, oh, you have to work harder. It just starts from this neutrality point. Now, we know, of course, that power exists wherever an authority exists. So I kind of want to say kudos to the show for trying to do that. But maybe the biggest kudos to the show is where they implicitly and also explicitly demonstrate an exception to that. And that's with the main character named Mitch. And we're going to talk about Mitch again a little bit later, but Mitch is the character who is the top tech at Glitch Tech and likes being the top tech. And, you know, we could think of this as white privilege. We could link this to a number of different concepts, and we will more again a little later. But Mitch is that exception to the power rule, and we see how the show then handles that. We'll talk about that with the plot a little later. There are actual efforts to do with inclusion, and it's almost like a hidden message. So, for instance, a mixed marriage. I didn't notice that the first time I kind of watched through, and as I was taking notes, it occurred to me that that's just there. And again, like I said earlier, starting from a point of equality, it's just a non-factor. It just is there. You know, same thing with friendships. And there's almost no examples in the show of the concept of the other, like we talked about earlier. Like the characters are all built differently, so they all are the other. There is no other category or dangerous category or wrong category or anything like that. Now, I have said that the show is not perfect, and here's just a couple notes I took early on when I started watching the episodes. And I won't say that I've softened my point of view on these, but I do wonder if it was me being overcritical or not, because this doesn't continue, or there ended up becoming an explanation for some of these things in later episodes. So the first thing I wrote down was crazy gamer chick. The concept that if you are a female and you like gaming, or you are a certain nationality and you like gaming, you know, anything like that, is that a stereotype if you're crazy and a little wild and so on? If you can think back to the picture of the grandmother driving the truck, you know, things like that. But again, I don't actually think that stereotype exists predominantly throughout the show. In the background of that same photo was the grandfather holding the male primary character, High Five. And Five's grandfather is a larger man, he's Mexican, he's tattooed, and he runs a taco truck. Well, is that a stereotype, or is that just a recognition of culture? And then finally, the mother for Miko, is it an overachieving Asian motherism? Because at one point, the little sister is thinking she may want to stop doing karate or judo, and, you know, the mom says, okay, well, we're going to get you into your next thing right off the bat. And, well, you know what? That's a lot of moms. That's not necessarily just because it's an Asian character. So I think we have to be careful. I think we have to recognize that there's such a massive diversity across the show that it'd be easy to try to nitpick and find a couple of different things that maybe aren't so much stereotypes as just the way a character was actually built. We jump over to Pokemon. Those characters, there's really minimal diversity in race. There is a difference in skin tone. We'll see some examples in a few minutes, but that's where it stops. The voices don't necessarily match the skin tone kind of idea as far as where that person might be from. There is no way of recognizing if there is even a race there, but yet they felt the need to change skin tones. And if there is a difference, then it's heavily stereotyped. And we're going to see that when we look at some examples here in a minute. I thought was really interesting. This is developed in Japan, but the majority of the characters are Caucasian or closer to Caucasian characters, which then leads to that concept of a systematic desire for that whiteness to come through. I mean, we see that in the real world, and we know it happens in a lot of media. We see it happening in the music industry, all kinds of things, and I think that's an example of it here. And then the more disturbing one might be the regular development within the storyline and the characters of the other. So here would be some specific examples. The eyes. The pupils of the eyes, I noticed early on in the first episode, and it continued throughout the show, the pupils of the eyes of bad characters are usually small round dots, where the eyes or the pupils of the eyes on your good characters or even your main storyline characters are a developed eye with a pupil and so on. And I couldn't believe that. And then I noticed the other place where the dotted pupil shows up is if a main character gets angry or is doing something maybe they shouldn't, that same eye shows up. So there's that other category there. A little bit same thing with clothing. What style of clothing and the colors of the clothing. We go back to that light color versus dark color type separation that we see, and we go back into that whiteness concept. Another point on the clothing is the concept that there's all kinds of storyline and big deal made about how beautiful things are and how nice things are and some of those things. And when I consider the Black Ballerina in children's book that was talked about by Heineken, I see a number of similarities how these characters are drawing about beauty here. Good characters are mostly clean, they have bright colors, things like that. If there is an exception, if it is a good character, for lack of better terms, that maybe is darker skinned, well, they have all kinds of ornamental necklaces or something like that. Heineken actually talks about the suggestion that happiness is contingent on the process of beauty. And, the Pokemon takes the time to comment on the beauty of things. They'll actually say like, oh, this is so beautiful, or this is amazing. Even the attitudes, their language, all those different things are different. And under colors, it even translates into the Pokemon. A Pokemon that's a really bright, fun color is usually a good Pokemon, and the Pokemons for the bad guys are usually really dark colors, right? So this is continuing throughout. So I don't really have any examples I want to show you about race representation from glitch text because it's just so vast and it's so varied, and it's one of the things that they are doing really well, which makes sense in terms of why I found that show. But let's take a second and look at the examples from Pokemon. So here's just a range of examples, different character shots and so on. And you'll notice that, the race identification is formed mostly just by the skin color. And as I said, the voice actors don't necessarily match up for that. Even really great voice actors that can do different accents, they're doing minimal changes in these situations. The top left corner, you've got Ash, you've got Pikachu, his Pokemon with them. You see they're powerful, they're ready, that kind of idea. And even if you look at the bottom picture and you look at the two male characters, the heads up and they're ready to go. The girls are staying a little more submissive, waiting, sitting back, that kind of idea. Okay, so now I want to focus though on probably two of the most glaring cases of race issues in the show. So the first one is the character on the left. And that character's name is Kai Wei. And Kai Wei is the only character in the show that is identified as being originally from the island of Alola where they're at. You could say native to that land. And what you're noticing in that outfit is the headrest, the ornamental on the shorts, the necklace. This is what the character wears every episode. Their demeanor, their voice, their language, it's not as friendly, it's more offset. While there are pupil development in the eyes, it is much smaller and minimal, and you can see that even comparing these two pictures. It is really a big difference. The second picture comes from an episode that is not allowed to be shown in North America. And why? Because it's too close to be considered blackface. You can see the Pokemon characters in the back, and Ash wanted to dress up like one of those characters, so he painted his body and his face to look like their darker skin. And as I said, their episode is no longer allowed in North America. So, we think about members of our political government, we think of members of the entertainment industry who have done things like that in the past, and we certainly know it's not acceptable and why they felt that that was right to do that in the storyline. In Brian's article about teaching people that racism is wrong, it stated that we need to be concerned with those subtle and hidden racialized processes. And I look at these two episodes or characters and it just jumps out at me. The first time I saw Kai Wei, he was brooding, he was not polite, he was not as well spoken, and this outfit that was always there, and how they made a big deal that he was the one that was from the area, and he was the one that was, they never used the word native, but native to that land, and how glaring it was compared to all these other students, and some of them were from that same region but didn't look anything like. And then when I found out about the second episode, I just think about that hidden racialization that's happening within this show. So a couple of the references I did mention there. I mentioned Brian's article, and that concept of that hidden racialization we just talked about. We also talked about that suggestion that happiness is contingent on the possession of beauty. And, there's so many times in the Pokemon series that they talk about the aesthetic beauty of something. And I think back to Glitch Tech, and there's no talk about that. And the happiness comes from them succeeding at what they wanted to do or helping others in a genuine way. And that's where their happiness comes from so often. The final reference on this page, actually, we haven't talked about it yet. It's going to come up, but I want to put all the references together. And it's talking about the white characters being positioned as active agents of change from Scheibel. And we're going to see that here in just a few minutes. So now let's talk about the plot of each of these storylines and how these things come about. With Glitch Techs, really there's a demonstration of inequality with purpose I talked about, and I said I'd talk about more later, and that's Mitch. And Mitch is the top tech. Mitch is the individual who, everybody looks up to. But what's really interesting is they've made that character of Mitch, and as part of the plot is his role is constantly to keep his place at the top of the podium. He'll step on others, he will steal from others, he will change rules. That happens right in the very first episode. And the example that I've written down here is the experience points. As they destroy monsters, they earn more experience points, which gets them more weapons, more tools, more equipment, which helps them, of course, then do better again. So you've got this situation where success is driving more success. And Mitch is the king of this. And I think of white privilege, the fear of losing, the fear of changing the system, and they do this really well. They make it so obvious that he is the only one doing this, and that all the other characters fundamentally disagree with this and are slowly removing Mitch from the equation. They don't involve him as much. They're trying to work together more often. They actually, when they find a balance for opportunities and for power and so on, you're often finding that different groups are helping each other so that they each earn what they need respectively, that they work together, they share the resources, and so on. When we switch over to Pokemon, that plot is often consistent of a savior storyline, right? There's this white savior that's going to come in and save the day, even if, for instance, with the Kai Wei character, in the first episode, he can do something amazing that Ash can't do. Well, of course, then Ash is going to find out how to do that and take over that role of doing that. And how is he going to do that? Well, we get into unearned privilege. One of the main characters regularly, Ash, regularly gets extra help from Pokemons like that female gendered Pokemon I showed earlier on for free. gives him something that Kai Wei had to work for. Ash ends up getting just for free. It's systematic that the others are only slightly jealous when this stuff happens, but they also think it makes sense that he gets it. Again, that's that hidden racialization that Brian talked about. And finally, then we have the agents of change that I mentioned from the Scheibel reference. And when I review the concept of whiteness in young literature on that article from Scheibel, Scheibel noted that how white characters are positioned as active agents of change, standing up and voicing injustices, while black characters remain silent. We often see, all of a sudden something exciting happens, and it's the white male that runs up and deals with the situation. The odd time it might be a male, which goes back to our feminist aspect of things, but more often than not, it's the white male that runs up and, for lack of a term, saves the day, or instigates the change, or starts the event happening that really, needs to happen, that kind of idea. So we've kind of looked at these two critiques, but I mentioned a couple along the way, and there are some other things we do have to take into account. One, of course, is intersectionality, and even a moment ago I talked about it's not just the white male, or white member that comes up and saves the day, but it's usually the white male that saves the day, and it's usually that concept of, it's not that one thing, it's not just their race, or it's not just their gender, it's usually these two aspects that come together. And I think that's where Glitch Text is doing such a great job, is that Miko, the main female character, is not only female, but also comes from a mixed heritage background. The father is clearly Caucasian, and the mother is Asian. We also see that her success is not based on gender or gender roles, and it's not based on her background. Miko, same idea. Miko would be a little bit the other skin. He's not black, he's not white, right? He has a tanned color skin in the show, is how they've depicted him, and he hangs around with everybody, and even the different characters within the show. They all have their own unique background. There's a complexity to each of these storylines, and it's that complexity that they are then taking advantage of or just working with. Where when we get to Pokemon, that intersectionality is actually making it that much worse or that much harder in a lot of their cases. I did mention the concept a little bit of Marxism, and certainly that experience point concept in Glitch Text is really bringing that forward about I get and I earn and it's mine. And at the same time, the rest of the show, while it does have that, they're trying to earn experience points. They don't make a big deal about it. And if someone else needs experience points, they actively help them get the experience points. They don't see that as a limited resource they have to fight for. Instead, they see that as a mutually beneficial resource that they can work towards. Finally, the only other concern I want to point out is just the concept of ableism a little bit, because I mentioned that crazy gamer chick stereotype at the start. And after doing a bunch of research, I did find out that Miko, the female main character in Glitch Text, is intended to have ADHD. And I bring this up because there are a number of episodes where she's having a really hard time to focus or concentrate on what's happening. For instance, an episode on having to do a tutorial, which students who are ADHD are notorious for having a challenge with tutorial work. She can't do it, and she doesn't want to do it, a mix of the two. So other than that, there really isn't in either show. They don't bring up the concept of ableism or ableists, and I think it's something they could certainly bring forward, and I guess I'll talk about that more a little bit in the conclusion. So for the conclusion, my thoughts are this. First of all, the justifications for the diversity rating. This project all started by trying to find a diverse cartoon. And, I found Glitch Text, and people had these great things to say. I did not find a single negative review. And when I first watched the show, I thought, hey, this isn't that perfect. I can't believe people are so happy about that. But I guess when I compare it to what the pre-existing cartoons out there have been. We talk about Marxism. Well, Pokemon is the highest grossing media franchise. If you're going to model somebody in the business world, you model the best. You model the guy who's the most successful, right? So if this is what the icon of modeling has been, then you know what, the justification is really there for Glitch Techs. It offers a variety of races. It represents those races honestly without providing tons of stereotypes to them. It does the same with male and female characters, and it tries to show that power can be balanced. It does not need to be housed in one place, and when it is housed in one place, that you can work together to try to displace that power. I guess that leads me then to the hidden messages concept. Both shows do have hidden messages. Glitch Tech's hidden messages, I would say, are those hidden messages and hidden curriculum of working together, working through adversity, understanding that everyone has challenges, supporting those people in their challenges, realizing if there is a set of resources that are limited, that you need to find a way to share those resources. In Pokemon, the hidden messages that became glaring was the objectification of women, how they should be dressed, how they should act, and that there is no such thing as equal races, that there is your primary white male character savior. They will deal with it. If there's a problem, they'll jump up. Girls, you don't have to jump up. And by the way, if your skin is not white, then we understand if you're going to be a little bit rude and if you're not going to be as well spoken, but also know that whatever you have, we're going to work hard to get the same thing, right? So two very different hidden messages. And my last thought on this becomes the developing a critical lens in all viewers. There are things missing that would give even further justification for Glitch Tech, for instance. There is no real sign of people with physical impairments. There's no signs of people with mental impairments in the show. And maybe that is something that's on their docket to bring forward. Who knows, kind of idea. So, it's not perfect. It's still missing those things. But I think when we're developing a critical lens in all viewers, and the reason I bold all was originally there, I had typed the concept of young viewers, but who gives permission to these kids to watch these shows? I allowed my children not only to play Pokemon, but to have their video games and be part of that large media franchise. And I've shown my kids these things now, and I've pointed these things out to them. So I really do think it's important that the differentiation between these shows and just how unbelievably different they are, I think needs to be used and needs to be educated in terms of developing that critical lens for viewers. I think parents need to understand what the difference is. I think our students need to understand what the differences are as well. So finally, these are just a list of references from my presentation. I thank you very much, and I'm certainly open to any questions or comments that you may have for the presentation, and thank you very much for the time.